You're listening to Releasing Trauma, a survivor's podcast. And now here's your host, Tracy Osborne. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. All right. We're talking about grief again today, but we're looking at it a little bit differently than we normally do. And today we're going to be talking about grief from the man's point of view. And typically when we talk about grief on this show, we're actually really talking about from the woman's point of view. And you know, I think that's just typical because men aren't supposed to cry, right? So, this is going to be great because men are supposed to cry. They are allowed to cry, and it's okay for men to grieve. So with me today is Mark Schutter, and he is going to talk to us about his journey and how he learned that, you know, from losing his wife at a young age, it's okay to grieve, it's okay to cry, and it's okay to move on. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you. And, you know, like I said before, this is very important that we get this out and we talk about it because, you know, even though we've progressed as a society emotionally in a lot of ways, we still have that overall men are supposed to be tough and
right.
Only the sensitive guys cry and, you know, the tough guys don't cry and they don't grieve and that
exactly.
kind of thing. And that's just a bunch of crap, really.
I would agree with that. It is a bunch of crap.
You know, tell us a little bit about your story. Now, you lost your wife to breast cancer.
Correct. I lost my late wife in 1993 to breast cancer. She was 27 and I was 28 at the time. We'd been married just over 5 years. So just in the beginning of our life together, if you will, no kids, just the two of us. Basically, for the 5.5 years we were married, I want to say 3.5 years as I think back, because it's been almost 30 years now, 3.5 years we were fighting cancer of some type. It went into a little bit. She was diagnosed originally, had an radical mastectomy of one breast, plus, all the lymph nodes under her arm and stuff. And that's kind of what they did back then. They just kind of immediately rushed you into surgery. Went through chemotherapy, went into remission, you know, if you will. Everything was good. Everything was negative at that point. All the blood work, all the tissue surrounding the tumor was negative. So we went on, had a great summer in 1992, if you will, when I think back, a really, really good summer. And then lo and behold, she had a pain in her other breast, her remaining breast, in the fall of 92. Went to the doctor, immediately referred her because of her history to a specialist, started doing a bunch of tests. They found a golf ball sized lump in her lung and just progressed from there, just very rapidly. The doctor told us when we asked, because Luca, that was my late wife's name, she asked the doctor, she's very upfront, faced this head on. She goes, what's the prognosis? And the doctor said, he goes, I'm an optimist. He goes, I've seen miracles happen, but honestly, 5 years. This is a very aggressive tumor and you're young. So we walked out, you know, kind of hopeful, like, okay, we got 5 years to fight this. We got 5 years to do what we need to do, even though we're a couple kids, not sure what we're going to do in the medical establishment. And she lasted 5.5 months. She died the following April. So it was just a really quick descent, especially the last 3 months. They discovered another lump at the base of her neck. They discovered a lump in her hip. As they kept doing, more, she'd feel more pain if they do, more tests, and they found more. The cancer was spreading. So, it went very, very quickly. So that was 1993. Way back before social media, before you could come home from work and jump on Facebook and find communities and find resources. Yep. That's the one thing that we could talk about that I've noticed. I mean, the evils and the ills of social media, but there is a resource out there in a community where you can connect with others. Didn't have that back in 93. So it was a little different world. And I'm watching that kind of from an outsider's perspective at this point, going, wow, my experience was very different than some of the people I've connected with who have recently went through grief and are going through it right now. So.
Yeah, I know when I lost my husband in 2019, one of the first things I did was, one of the first things I did was jump on Facebook and find support groups.
Yeah.
And they got me through. If it wasn't for just the widow support group, and then I also found a widow's dark humor group. And anybody who's gone through trauma, so many of us have resorted to dark humor to get us through. And those are the things that really got me through those first probably 6 months of losing him and trying to figure out, now what?
Now what? Exactly.
Yeah. So, after you lost her, there wasn't really any support group, and you just, kind of decided that you were going to show the world that you're a tough guy and power through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had family and friends around me, don't get that wrong. There was support there, but it was, and there's so much stuff that happened, as after the death. The death is only the beginning. It's like all of a sudden, and now it's like, and I'm wading through this with support and help and guidance from people, but it's like, I got to make funeral arrangements. I got to talk to a pastor. I got to go to the funeral home, pick out a casket. I got to decide what she's going to wear for the viewing. I got to decide what she's going to wear for the funeral. Whether it's going to be an open casket or a closed casket. What are we going to say at the funeral? What do you want? Songs do you want played? All these decisions that I look back now that I was like, I'm having to make all these decisions, but at the same time, I wouldn't let anybody else make them. It was that weird dichotomy because it gave me something to focus on. It gave me a chance to basically go, these things need to be done. So I shut down in a lot of ways, kind of became numb. And that's the shock, I think, originally going through it. And then, after the funeral, after everybody kind of went back, it was sort of the same thing. It's like, well, now I got to take care of the house. I'm the only one here. The lawn needs mowed. The dog and the cats need fed and taken care of. And it's like, and I got to go back to work. And so you just kind of, from a guy's perspective, you kind of get on with it. It's like, you can't just, you tell yourself you can't wallow in your house and just ball up in a corner. And you can't, but you also don't allow yourself to even grieve a lot of times. And that was where I was at. A large percentage of the time, unless there were moments where it overwhelmed me. But I made sure those moments were when I was alone, if I could, as much as I could, So,
yeah. I think it's a little bit easier for women to be allowed to wallow in our grief. Yes, I still had kids to take care of. I had my disabled stepmom that was living with me at the time. That was her full-time caregiver, so I did have responsibilities, but I also worked from home and I'm my own boss. So I was allowed to, take the time that I needed. And, I slept so much those first 3 months. And
that's interesting because I didn't sleep.
My bed was my solace. It was my comfort zone. And the only time, and I don't know, maybe it was because it was our bed, so I felt closer and connected to him. I don't know, but it was definitely, that was my solace. I just kind of let the depression take over and slept. But, like you said, those first few days or the first week after we lose somebody, we're walking through this mind-numbing fog, and we're expected to make these incredibly important decisions about, their finality. And it's like, how did we even do that? When I lost my dad, they had already planned it out, which was great. They knew it was coming. He knew he had about 6 or 7 months. They had everything ready, planned out, all of that. But, Mark it was sudden. It was just one day he was there and the next day he was not. And I had no warning. So horrible. It does make it tough. I mean, we never even really talked about it. I didn't know what he wanted. I had an inkling of what he wanted, because we're very similar, but
we were a lot the same. But we didn't talk about what if, if you die, I mean, it's like, it was more about focused on, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through today, with the chemotherapy and with the pain and stuff. It was an effort just to get through each day sometimes.
Oh, I'm sure.
So
I'm sure. Yeah. And, and who wants to focus on death when you're fighting for survival?
exactly.
It's like,
and some of it's, I think, some of it's naive, I think, in being innocent,
very.
to young kids. It's like, we got a whole life ahead of us. It's like, no kids yet. It's like, this is not, it's kind of denial in a way, because you can't believe this is really happening, sort of thing. She's not going to die, She's 27. Right. It's like,
he said 5 years.
Exactly. It's a long time. And,
we've got time.
Can happen in 5 years. So
exactly. So, so it wasn't until what was it, like 30 years later, or that you started to write your book, and that's when the grief really kind of resurfaced.
Yeah, I like I said, I shut it down. I buried it, and I'm not saying there weren't times of very emotional, turmoil, but for the most part, I shut it down, didn't talk about it. Things would come up at work, about a death in somebody's family or something. I didn't go there. I didn't share my experience. I worked with people for years who had no idea that I had lost my first wife to cancer. Got remarried. My current wife and I actually, wonderful woman. We have a daughter now who's 17. When she was about 10, so we're talking about 7 years ago, she went to her mother and said, "Mom, was Dad married once before?" A 10-year-old's innocence. She had overheard conversations, ears are everywhere, that us talking about it, because my wife, she knew the story. And we were always going to tell our daughter, but it's like, we didn't know when. Like, well, I guess God says now's the time. So we told her. That it opened a can of worms, if you will, and prompted in me a lot of emotional feelings. Like, oh my gosh, now my daughter knows that I was married once before. I started feeling guilty about having a child with my current wife and not my late wife, and all those feelings. And my wife, God bless her, looked at me and goes, "You need to see somebody and talk to somebody." I'm like, "I can't talk to anybody else." She goes, "We'll find somebody to talk to." Well, we had a friend at church, a man who was a counselor, and I got connected up with him, kicking and screaming basically in the beginning to go see him. But over the course of the next 3-4 years, we started unpacking this onion, if you will. And that's what he always called it. He goes, "There's layers to this, and you just have to walk through each one at a time. You can't fix it all." And he basically said, he goes, "I think we're dealing with a lot of unresolved grief," which made perfect sense, because I didn't deal with it. And as I went through therapy and counseling with him, there were moments where he would come up and say, "Wow, you should write a book about this." He goes, "I talked to older gentlemen, people who've been through the war, who've been in the military, who've experienced horrific things, and they're still dealing with it in their 70s and 80s because they've never dealt with it." He goes, "There are guys out there." He goes, I have, there are guys that need to hear your story, that they're not alone." So that kind of prompted, like, "Oh, maybe I should write a book." My wife was really supportive. And so just started diving in basically the last 3 years. Shared with a couple people kind of offline that I didn't even know, other authors who had written books, people that I connected through professionally. And they're like, they would tilt their head when I kind of mentioned my story and go, "Yeah, I'm writing a book about it." Like, "Wow, yeah, you should write a book about that. That's an amazing thing." And just started going back to old journals, which were, trying to piece together the story, if you will, because I'll be honest with you, I have a lot of blank spots in my memory, probably because I did shut it down. And so it's like, what really happened there? So reconstructing the whole timeline and some of the things that happened. And I'm sure some of the stuff, in my book, there's a caveat that this is the best of my recollection, but it's been almost 30 years. It's like memories change and fade. But I did my best to be true to the story, our story, and the hope that I have now and the life after, that life can be good again, because it is good again. The book was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but also very therapeutic, and just, a huge part of my therapy. But I struggled. 6 months before it was published, I was like, "I'm done. I don't want to do this." I basically threw up my hands. I'm not putting this out there. I'm not putting this out there for all my family and friends to see. But, went through with it. And the book is out there. I've gotten some really good feedback on it. So hopefully it is a blessing to others. And that's one thing I tell people. They say, "Well, what's the book about?" Well, it's about my story dealing with grief. But it's kind of everybody's story in a way, because we're all going to deal with grief. It's going to be different for everybody. Yours is very different than your experience, very different than mine. But we're all going to deal with this. We can deny it all we want and put our heads in the sand. But unfortunately, we're all going to die. And we're going to have somebody die on us. If that's just the reality. So what do you do with that? Do you just deny it and ignore it and move on? And I want to be happy. I want my late wife, Luca, wants me to be happy. I have no doubt about that. She doesn't want me wallowing in misery I was 28 when she died. Does she want me to be unhappy for the rest of my life? No. Does she want me to miss her? Maybe, she wants to know. She knows that I love her. So let's move on. And it did take me a long time to get there. Don't get me wrong. And that was very hard. It's been a very hard journey, and I'm still healing. Not a day goes by that I don't think about her. But I have a great life now. And that's my main message, is like, there is life after whatever the trauma is, but you have to choose it, because life's going to happen whether you want it to or not. Tomorrow's going to come, the sun's going to come up. Are you going to choose to have life? Or are you going to choose to just wallow in that? And it's not easy. It's not easy at all,
No, absolutely not. It's not. Excuse me. And yeah, one of the things that I say all the time is there is life after trauma, and you're not alone. Those are my catchphrases. Mm-hmm. And but I love what you said. Are you going to choose it? You can choose life, or you can choose to allow your trauma to overcome you, or overtake you. And and there's going to be days, and there's going to be times where it's just too much, and it will overtake you, and that's perfectly okay.
Right.
I mean, look at you, 30 years later, you still have your moments. I'm almost 3 years in, and I still have I still have moments where I get super sad, or I start crying, or I'll have a moment, and my fiance works from home too, so if I have a moment and I start bawling, I'll just get up and go into the other room where he's at, and he'll just take one look at me and stand up and just wrap me in his arms and let me cry it out. And he knows that, I just need, a couple of minutes. Let me sob for a few minutes, and then I'll be okay. And I'll just, be on my merry little way,
exactly.
And that's, and that's all. And that's all it takes. And,
it sounds simple, but finding somebody that does that for you, that's the tricky part.
That is hard.
That's a blessing. That is a blessing. You and I are both blessed in that way.
Very much so, because I see other widows out there and widowers who they struggle. The new person doesn't want to hear about the late spouse. They don't want anything to do with it. They don't want pictures. They don't want memories. It's like they feel like they're fighting a ghost. And that's not the case at all. I mean, that person will never leave us, ever.
Right.
And the right person for us after we lose somebody is going to accept that, and they're going to embrace that, and they're going to want to know about that person, because they love us, and they want to know, about the person that we love so deeply too. Right. So,
and that made us part of who we are today.
Exactly.
I mean, who I am today is based on that experience I went through a lot. And it's based on a lot of other experiences too, but you cannot discount that.
Yeah.
I'm a very different person when I go to hospitals nowadays.
Yeah.
Than I was back then.
I'm sure. So, what is some advice that you have for the men out there who are, they're going through, whatever it is, whatever kind of grief it is, loss of a parent, loss of a spouse, loss of a, whatever, or, what would you do differently if you could do it again?
What would I do differently? Well, the advice and what I do differently may be two different questions, but I don't like that.
Let's start with the advice, and then we'll ask what you did.
The advice I go here. It's like, this is your journey, if you will. This is no one else's. It's no one else's path. Are there people that can walk with you and support you? Absolutely, but it is your path. And one of the things that I tell people a lot is, because they're like, I don't know how I can go on. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know what my life's going to be like. It's like, stop. Let's get through the next minute. I break it down. And I did this for myself sometimes. Let's break it down to this next minute. We can get through this next 30 seconds. Let's just sit here. Let's listen to the wind. Let's listen, if we're outside, let's listen to the wind in the trees. Let's look at the sun, feel the sun on you. The next 30 seconds, calm. And it may take a little while to be able to do that for 30 seconds, but it's like, okay, now a minute. And you start tacking those on, and that does not fix anything. But all of a sudden you've gotten through a day, and then another week. And that's what, they say time heals all wounds. It doesn't, but time helps us get a perspective, if you will, and I think the pain kind of lessens a little bit in a lot of cases, or can lessen, but sometimes it's just getting through. That's my biggest advice, is like, let's just get through the next 30 seconds. Let's just breathe. And I'm right here with you. One of the things that, before I go on to what would I do differently, I would do, this kind of tags on to do a lot of things differently, because I shut a lot of people out. I kept people at arm's length. I kept my family at arm's length. I kept my friends at arm's length. So I didn't want to get hurt again. Even people who were trying to help me. It was, I think back now, and a lot of it was superficial, because it's like, I'm not letting you get that close, especially emotionally. I'm not going to let you get that close emotionally. One of the things that my faith and Luca's faith and my wife's faith now, very important to us, very integral part of who we are. And that was kind of going back. It's like, we have faith that God's going to heal her, and if he doesn't, we didn't talk about this, there's a far better place, there's a heaven, you're going to be healed up there anyway. But I go to Job 2:13 in the Bible. And this is before, Job's had everything taken away twice. God's allowed it. Now he's sitting there in the throes of his grief, and his three friends come and they see him. And Job 2:13 says, they saw him, and I'm paraphrasing, saw him from a great distance. They came and sat down on the ground beside him for 7 days and 7 nights with no one speaking, because they saw that his pain was very great. We as men want to fix things for others and for ourselves. So what can I do to fix this? How can we fix it? Let's go out for a drink. Let's go do this. Sometimes we just need to go and sit on the ground, get down to their level, and not say anything. And that's what I would do differently. I would allow myself that space, as well as allow others that space, especially now when I find myself in situations like, because there are no words that can fix it. There are no things that can fix it. So I look at that small scripture, and then it goes into the next 30 chapters of Job and his friends arguing back and forth about why all this calamity befell him, before God comes on the scene and kind of tells his side of the story. It's like that one little script that they sat on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights with no one speaking. That's an eternity in our lives now, in our fast-paced life now. 7 days and 7 nights. I can't shut up for 30 seconds. Back to my original comment, So it's like, so I think that's my advice, both to myself, and I try to do that to this day. It's like, give yourself, breathe. And I struggle with it. It is a struggle for me. And if you need to cry in those 30 seconds, cry. It's okay. But that's kind of like, that's what I would say, is like, get through the next 30 seconds and then give yourself some grace, and that's the one thing that I've had to come to realize, and kind of back to men don't cry. It's like, I suffered a huge loss. This was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, wanted to have children with, wanted to grow old with. And she died through nobody's fault. There was no hit and run accident. There was no drunk driver. She died of this hideous disease called cancer, which is invisible a lot of the time. And that hurt. I watched her die. I watched her fade, and I watched her die. I stood there by her bedside when she died. Why wouldn't that hurt? But it took me a lot of years to even acknowledge that hurt, that it's okay that hurt. And then by the next step, it's okay to cry about that. It's okay to be hurt by that. That's not a failing. It's not a weakness, especially for a guy. It's like, we get our leg broke. That hurts. We admit it hurts. We get hurt playing sports or whatever. But if something hurts our heart, we don't want to admit that. Why the F not? I guess. Why the hell not? It hurt. That doesn't make me any weak. I grow stronger. My leg grows back stronger, or my muscles get stronger after I've hurt myself. It's like, we can come back stronger. And that's the whole point of, kind of where I'm at. It's like, cowboys do cry. Men do cry. We don't always do it in front of people, and that's okay. I'm not advocating for that, but it's like, we're told to buck it up. We're told to get up, brush it off, move forward. And that's all well and good. And there are moments in life when you have to do that. Yep. Absolutely. I don't disagree with that at all. I've had to do it in my own life. But there's also a time it's like, we can come back stronger by allowing ourselves to feel these things and then move forward. And that's my experience, and that what I'm struggling with, because it's so easy to just write off from things. It's so easy to just go, I'm not going to deal with that. It's easier in the moment. It's not easier in the long term.
Absolutely. Because it doesn't go away.
Right. Does not go away.
It festers.
Yes,
it
it
festers.
does.
It's like a splinter you ignore. It just kind of sits there and festers until it comes to the surface.
Yep.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for coming on and
You're welcome.
Being vulnerable, sharing your story with us and talking with us today. This has been wonderful to hear this from a man's perspective. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Listeners, I definitely urge you to go grab a copy of Mark's book, Cowboys Are Not Supposed to Cry. I will have all the links in the show notes as always. If you go to releasingtraumapodcast.com and pull up Mark's episode, I will have his contact information, the link to his book there for you. So, Mark, thank you again for coming on the show. And listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you in the next show. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure you hit subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a show. Be sure to check us out on our new socials on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.